Good evening, everyone. This is Tammy Hilliard-Thompson. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar titled Academic Integrity, Choosing the Right Road. Feel free to post questions if you have questions, and I will do my best to answer them throughout the webinar. So tonight, again, we're going to be talking about academic integrity and choosing the right road. So academic integrity, what does it mean? If you take a look at the definition provided by Princeton University, and I'm going to read this verbatim, it's observing basic honesty in one's work, words, ideas, and actions in a principle to which all members of the community are required to subscribe. So what does that really mean? What that means is a student is responsible for doing his or her own research, creating their own ideas, and submitting authentic work. So you definitely have to keep that in mind. Also, too, let's define what work means. Work means anything that's due to your institution, your college. It could be a project, it could be a presentation, it could be a group work, it could be a test, anything that is due for a grade or some kind of review at your college is considered work. So you have to make sure that you have integrity at all times when you're submitting different projects. So what do you need to know about academic integrity? There's 4 things you need to know. One is that each college has their own policies and guidelines. So each of your colleges have their own rules and regulations. And also, too, some of these policies and guidelines are specific to the college that you're in. When I say college, I mean department, major. So for instance, psychology may be a little bit different from the math department. The math department may be a little bit different from the engineering department. So you have to make sure that you know the distinction between the different departments and colleges within a college. You need to be familiar with your college's policies. I just mentioned that. So you have to make sure that you take some time to research and be aware of what those policies are. Saying I did not know is not acceptable. It will not be accepted at any college or university that you did not know the policies and procedures of the academic integrity policies. And then also using your time wisely is a really, really good thing to do, and to also seek clarification. So let's explore this a little further. So what does it really mean? You as a student, what does academic integrity really means? Well, it means that, one, you're knowledgeable and you're trustworthy as a member of the intellectual community. So you may ask, what is the intellectual community? The intellectual community is the community that you now belong to when you decided to attend your particular college. It means that now you are among those individuals who will add something to the college, to the academics, to the research. So you're now considered a member of the academic community. You also agree that you're going to contribute your own ideas and thoughts and make sure that you're not taking anybody else's ideas and thoughts. You should submit your own work. And also, you should refuse to assist anybody else when they're trying to do something dishonest, especially be it academic, be it personal, be it social. But since we're focused on academics tonight, that's mainly what we're talking about. So let's talk about academic dishonesty. What does that mean? Again, I'm going to read this verbatim, so there's no misinterpretations. But academic dishonesty means academic dishonesty is defined as a student's use of unauthorized assistance with intent to deceive an instructor or other such person who may be assigned to evaluate the student's work in meeting course and degree requirements. So if you think about that for a second, I actually want to add something to that because it said with the intent to deceive. You also have to know and realize that sometimes, even if it's unintentional, you can be held accountable for academic dishonesty. And you definitely don't want that. So again, that's why it's key to make sure that you're familiar with your college's policies and procedures. The other thing too that you need to know is that academic integrity is the opposite of academic dishonesty. So you want to have the integrity and you do not want to be dishonest. So what 2 words come to mind when you think of academic dishonesty? Typically what students say is plagiarism, But what is plagiarism? And they also say cheating. But what is cheating? So let's take a look at what the online Webster Dictionary defines as plagiarism. And plagiarism is defined as the act of using another person's words or ideas without giving credit to that person, the act of plagiarizing something. So let's take a look at the definition of cheating. The online Webster Dictionary defines cheating as to break a rule or lawful or law, usually to gain an advantage at something, to take something from someone by lying or breaking a rule. So I want to share with you some examples of academic dishonesty because, again, as we just viewed, research shows that most students think that academic dishonesty is just plagiarism and it's cheating, but it's not. It's much more than that. So we already talked about cheating. I think cheating is pretty much self-explanatory, but just to give you some ideas, cheating can also be using your iPhone in class when you're not authorized to use it. It could also mean that maybe you've looked at someone's test next to you while they're taking a test, or maybe you borrowed the answer. So that's some forms of cheating. Plagiarism. Plagiarism, as we talked about in the definition, means you're taking something that does not belong to you, but in an academic setting. Sometimes students have been known to say, well, I only borrowed it. Well, you can't borrow somebody else's work. Also, you need to be sure that you're not taking or borrowing items of graphs, datas, chart, things like that, films and photos. So we're going to talk a little bit further on in the presentation about how you would go about using those type of resources if you feel that it's pertinent to your work. Fabrication. Fabrication is also another area of academic dishonesty. And basically, to give you examples of what that is, that means altering documents, maybe forging signatures on academic records, letters of permission. Maybe a student has created a letter of permission to do something that was not actually created by a staff member or a professor at the university. Also, you need to also consider that making up information, written or verbal, is also considered fabrication. So let me give you an example of something that could be fabricated. Maybe you're doing a paper and you write something in your paper that says, brown-eyed students are much cuter than hazel-eyed students. Well, if you don't have anything to substantiate that and you made that up just to make your work sound more intriguing, more interesting, then that's considered fabrication. Multiple submissions. You need to be aware that you cannot at any college take a paper that you've already done from one class and submit it to another class without permission from your professor. So for instance, if you had a paper due in psychology and then next semester you take sociology, you are not allowed to submit that same paper for two different classes. So that's something very important to be aware of. Oops. A technical error there, but that's okay. We're going to keep moving. Falsification of academic records. I think we spoke a little bit about that, but also you also want to be aware that if you falsify exams, projects, papers, anything that's written or that you had to submit, that's considered falsification of a record. You also have to keep in mind that sometimes students in the past, not with this organization, but in an academic setting, have also forged different things, maybe from a professor, maybe from the financial aid office, the registrar's office. So those things too are considered dishonest in the academic world. So facilitating academic dishonesty, that means you're a part of what's going on. So for instance, maybe someone in your classroom has a copy of the test and you realize that they have a copy of the test and they're actually selling copies of the test. So you purchase a copy of that test, and then what you do is you then sell it to other members within your classroom. That's facilitating the academic dishonesty. You're actually a part of helping other students be a part of something that is definitely not honest and does not show integrity. So you definitely don't want to be involved in that. And we're pretty sure that, you know, for those of you that are logging on, that this is not something that you would do anyway. But it's good for you to be aware. Unfair advantage. An example of unfair advantage is is, for instance, maybe you know someone that's a professor, they're a family friend, and they're willing to give you answers to the test, or they're willing to allow you to skip the test for no apparent reason. That is considered an unfair advantage. And anything else that falls in the realm of being dishonest when it comes to your college or when it comes to academia will fall in this category. So let me give you some more specific examples because we want to make sure that everyone is clear on this topic. So using unauthorized copies of tests, we talked about that. Sometimes students have been known to be able to get access to the teacher's edition of a book or a catalog or something that the professor is going to be using in class. And inside that resource, sometimes copies of the test can be there. So it is considered to be dishonest if you get access to those materials and then you also either give them to someone or you use them yourself. So submitting works of another person or previously used, you may have heard stories of students buying papers from other people. Maybe it's an A paper and you really want an A. That is something that's really, really frowned upon and definitely could have severe consequences, which we will talk about a little bit later. Submitting the same paper for multiple classes, we talked about that. If you're going to consider doing that, because maybe the topic is relevant, maybe you've taken one class this semester and then your second year, you've taken another class and the topic that that professor presents offers an opportunity for something that you did and you felt the work was really good, you got a great grade on it. Well, you have to check with the professor to get the professor's permission. And if they do not grant it, then you cannot use it. Using your cell phone, I mentioned that, for unauthorized class assignments or tests. You cannot tweet answers. You cannot use social media. You cannot take a selfie of the page in your book. So you really, really have to make sure that if it's not mentioned on the syllabus, that you ask if you can have your phone out in class. Some people actually take notes on their phone. Some people actually, with permission, record the lecture. So if that is not something that you've been given permission to do, then that is definitely something that you should not be using. So I want to take a moment to see if there's any questions so far before we move on. Okay, I'm checking. I do not see any questions posted, so we will continue to move forward. So what do you need to know? There's 4 areas that I want to talk about tonight so that you're aware. One is original work. The other one is your sources, then citing sources, and then when in doubt, ask the professor. So let's start with original work. What is original work? Well, basically, let's use this example as this book cover, as an example. So say, for instance, you read this book, Star Wars, The New Adventure, and you really, really like the book. Matter of fact, you can relate to the book. There's things in the book that you identify with, and you think this book is going to be great for the paper that you have to do. So one of the things that you do is you write your paper and you actually take different points and ideas from the book. It fits really nice with the story that you're trying to tell. It fits really nice with the topic matter. So you use these points, you use these ideas. But what you don't do is you don't give credit to the author. So this is considered not an original work. So basically, what a student should do is read the book, evaluate it, summarize the information, but then also add your own information to it, your own data, make it your own, and then the information that you took from the book, you're going to need to cite that. And we'll talk about that as we go along in the presentation. So it has to be original. You know, if you're talking about Leia or Leia's daughter, if you're familiar with the Star Wars characters or Darth Vader, and you do not give credit to where you received or borrowed those names from, then it's not an original work. You also have to make sure that it's yours, you know, it's distinctly your own. One of the things that you want to do is you're adding to the research. So you want to be one of those individuals where when someone actually goes and reads your material, they're looking to cite you based on the material they are using for their work that you've contributed to research. And this could be in any form. It doesn't just have to be English. It could be math. It could be engineering. It could be sociology. So no matter what you're majoring in, you still want to have original work. So let's talk a little bit about your sources. What should they be? How should they be? Well, one of the things we just talked about is the work has to be yours. You have to distinguish your work from that of the source. So if we go back to the Star Wars book, when you summarize your story and you're talking about your point of view, it's from your point of view, but then you reference information from the Star Wars book. You want to establish credibility and authority as your knowledge and ideas, and that's what we're all in college for. I'm actually a college student myself, so our goal is basically to be able to produce our own work that adds to research, adds to the literature out in the field, and that we become more knowledgeable about the topic that we're writing about. For that, you also want to permit other readers to be able to read your stuff and want to learn more about it. So they want to further their reading based on your original work. And then you want your readers or whoever's looking at your work to be able to check your sources. So that's why it's important that your work is original, information that you're using to relate to your work is cited, and that you're, again, contributing to your college and the academic resources that they already have. So let's talk a little bit about citing resources or citing your sources. So you have to make sure that you check with your department and with your college and with your major for what their policies and guidelines are, right? Because again, depending on what you're majoring in, the disciplines may have different rules and different protocols. So you have to make sure that you do that. And then once you write about something that you saw or that you read, for instance, the Star Wars New Adventure, then you're going to do what's called a citation. So again, but be sure to check with your professors first. So what do we cite? What sources do you have to cite? You have to cite when it's a quotation. So for instance, if you're saying that Darth Vader said such and such, then you need to quote and put in parentheses on each side that, quotation marks on each side that this is a quotation so that people will be able to distinguish it as such. So when you paraphrase, we just talked about that, that's summarizing. You need to make sure that you cite your source. When you have a summary, again, you want to make sure that you cite your source. And then when you're using facts, information, data, those could be graphs, those could be charts. You need to make sure that you also cite your sources. And then supplemental information is information that may not fit directly in your paper because it's too long or it's too much information. You would put that at the back of the paper, at the end of the paper, but you also have to cite where you found that information or where you're obtaining that information from. And one thing that I wanted to point out to you all is that Wikipedia is not a valid, reliable, credible source. So do not use Wikipedia as a citation for citing a resource or a source. So when in doubt, what do you need to do? Ask your professor. I would always ask my professor before the start of each class when you're given an assignment, just to make sure that you're on the right page. Okay? Because integrity is always doing the right thing when no one's looking, right? So we have to make sure that we stay in line with that. So what are the consequences? I think this is really, really important. Sometimes, unfortunately, students do not find out the consequences until after the act has been committed. And as we talked about, sometimes being what's considered academically dishonest is not always intentional, but sometimes it may not matter to the college or to the faculty member on that campus because in their mind, you should know. And so from this webinar, we want to make sure that you are aware of policies and procedures. So let's talk about the consequences. Well, if a student is accused of plagiarism, cheating, any of the forms of academic dishonesty that we talked about, they could be given a warning. A warning is given when maybe it's not a severe violation of policies. Maybe it was a very small misstep, and also maybe intentional. But again, you have to keep in mind that this all depends on what the school, the college decides is necessary. Disciplinary probation is another consequence. That means that your standing, your place at the college, at the university, is in jeopardy. So basically, probation is given when they feel like, well, this student maybe has been a good contributing member to the college or can be a good contributing member to the college. So therefore, they feel like the student deserves another chance, but they're going to watch the student per se. So how about suspension with conditions? That basically means that you have been suspended from your college or your university, but they put some conditions on it. Maybe you've received an F grade and you failed the course, but they're allowing you to rewrite the paper, but you're also suspended, and maybe you get a chance to turn that paper or project in when your suspension is completed. Or maybe they're asking you to present to some of the students on the campus, maybe the incoming freshmen, about academic dishonesty, academic integrity. So there may be conditions assigned to your suspension. And when you complete the time that you're suspended from the college and you also complete your conditions, typically there either is a review to see if they want to allow you back into the college, or you're automatically accepted back into the college. Withholding a degree, this is very important for seniors. You can be a week, a day, an hour from graduating, or maybe even you've graduated, but you haven't received your degree yet. The institution, your college, has the right to withhold your degree. And that means you will not be receiving a degree from the college that you've spent 4, 2, 6, maybe 5 years at, working really hard to get, this degree. So you have to really, really be mindful of that. Expulsion. Expulsion means that basically your time at the college is finished. You're no longer allowed to be a member of that intellectual community. There's no suspensions, there's no warnings, there's no disciplinary probation. You are no longer welcome at that institution. So you also have to really think about that, because you could be a junior, you could be a senior, and you're almost to the finish line completing your degree, and you made a really, really unwise decision, and now you're expelled from the school. So you definitely don't want that to happen. Loss of a job. Keep in mind, academics can be related to your career. So you could be working on campus, or you could be in a field where maybe you've just been offered a position, or maybe the position that you have require that you do not have any type of academic dishonesty fraction that you were accused of and found guilty of. And so that could affect your job. And then also, this is very important, you could be banned from the industry. You definitely need to look into your major and see if that's one of the stipulations or consequences of violating the academic integrity policy. And when I say that, for instance, I'll give an example. Accountants can be banned from the industry or from that career field. Teachers can be banned from the industry or that career field. And we're talking about the state that you're in, but for some careers and some jobs, it depends. It may not just be in that particular state that you work in. So you definitely want to do your research in that area. And loss of scholarship, that's a huge one. Typically, if you're found responsible for being dishonest in the academic world, either one or more of these consequences can be put in place for you. So loss of money could affect the fact that you may not be able to return to the college. So you want to make sure, again, that you're familiar with your institution's policies and guidelines. So what should you do if you're accused of academic dishonesty? Well, the first thing you need to do is review your college's policies and guidelines. I mean, you should have already done that because we've talked about it. Even if you haven't done it to this point, when this webinar ends, you have the opportunity to go and do some research. Okay, but say, just for argument's sake, now you've been identified as someone that's plagiarized. And it's an accusation, so it may not be accurate, but it could be accurate. You need to find out what the policy states. The next thing you want to do is you want to review your work and see what the professor or the faculty member is talking about. And that's if you're given the opportunity. Sometimes the meeting with the faculty member or with the dean or with the judicial office is called, and you have to appear to it before you have a chance to even review anything. But if you do get the opportunity, you want to review the policy, and then you want to review your work to see if you can identify where they have a concern. Or if you already know that you've done something that you shouldn't have, then there would be no reason for you to review the work, because you will already be aware of that. The next thing that we advise is you need to tell the truth. You need to be honest. If it was intentional, that's the best way to go, especially since universities and colleges do have it where consequences can be added to the already consequences that you are going to receive for the act that you committed. So you want to be honest, right? The other thing you want to think about too, maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe you still, even though you reviewed the policies, you felt like you weren't aware of something. It still would go a long way if you're honest. Now, that may not deter the college or university from removing you or providing consequences or whatnot, but it may. So please keep that in mind. How about Philadelphia Futures? Contact us so that we can help you if possible. At least we can listen to the situation. We could probably offer advice. Now, we wouldn't be able to get you out of the situation, but we could at least, find out what occurred, find out, from your research and your review, what the policy states, and then we could offer advice that way. And last but not least, the best remedy, as I've said throughout this webinar, is to be familiar with your college's policies and guidelines to avoid being in this situation. So you always have to make sure that you are having the utmost integrity, and no matter what your project is, no matter what your work is, and no matter what you're doing. So that's pretty much it for the webinar for tonight, but I want to see if there's any questions. So I'm going to just wait about 10 seconds to see if there are any questions posted. Okay, so there are no questions. So that means that, to me, that you all have a great understanding of this topic matter, which makes me feel really, really good. So in closing, you have to make sure that you make wise choices. There's always two roads to a decision, the right way and the not so correct way. And you always have to be the one to make the right decision. So make sure that you're reviewing your policies at your institution. Make sure that you're asking questions for clarity. Make sure that you check in with your professors. Even when you check in with your professors and you still don't have a good understanding of what they're saying, then you might even want to check in with the dean or, a person that's in the discipline that you're majoring in. And then last but not least, you definitely want to check in with us, and maybe we can help you clarify the policy. So with that said, make sure you choose the right road. Thank you so much for joining us. And on behalf of Christina, Abby, Cherie, Kelly, and myself, we really, really enjoyed tonight's webinar. And again, if you have questions, make sure that you use the resources that I've demonstrated in tonight's webinar. Thank you.